Hi, my name is Russ, and I would like to take a moment to address one particular point regarding the Truth Wizards test, and that is how easy is this test to pass by guessing or luck or random chance, or it just happened to be your birthday and you got it, or you got this letter in the mail. You open up the envelope and put all those numbers down, and ta-da, you're the winner. How easy is that? Well, it turns out that's a pretty straightforward process to figure out. And so what I want to do is walk you through that and let's see what the actual result is. This is kind of like playing the odds in Vegas. What are the odds in passing this? So that's what we're going to do. Small piece of background, the test was created by Dr. Paul Ekman, whom I've never met, and Dr. Maureen O'Sullivan, who sadly has since passed away, and I never met her either, and was administered to many, many people. I've seen numbers as high as 15,000 to 20,000 people. I've never met any of them. So you can infer correctly, I'm not a truth wizard. I've never taken the test. I am very interested in the area, very interested in the subject, but again, I'm not a truth wizard. What I do enjoy, another area I enjoy a lot, is math, so I want to just show you very quickly how to calculate the odds on this, and I'll give you several ways to kind of benchmark the odds at the end in a minute here, which I think you're going to like a lot. By way of small piece of background, Dr. O'Sullivan gave a presentation to the Commonwealth Club of California that you can see on the screen here. I'm not going to play any of it, I just need a moment of it, but if you're interested in lies and the truth wizards, I would strongly encourage you to listen to this presentation. It's really interesting. In it, she mentions what she does, which is she gives presentations to groups such as the FBI, the CIA, psychologists, people who teach interviewing to police officers, so on and so forth. And if people get a 90% or better on that test, then she invites them to take more testing. There are actually 2 more tests, and if a person gets 80% or better on either of the other 2 tests, then they qualify as a truth wizard. So again, a person needs 90% on test 1, and then 80% on test 2, or 80% on test 3, or of course both, and that qualifies a person as a truth wizard. So that's the criteria, and we can also learn a bit about the testing because Dr. O'Sullivan and Dr. Ekman actually told us. So again, this is publicly available information. What I'm going to recommend you do if you want to learn this is do a search for the phrase, the Wizards of Deception Detection. You'll find it's a chapter in a book, and the book is The Detection of Deception in Forensic Contexts. What I'm looking at is a Google preview of the book, which is, again, free. The whole book itself is not in the preview at all, but the part that we need to figure out the odds is actually in here. So let's scroll down in this handy-dandy preview, and they tell us about the 3 lie detection measures. Number 1 is something called the Emotion Deception Judgment Task. And I'm not going to go through what's in the test. You can read the article if you want, or buy the book, even better. But what they state is in each of the 10 items. So you can see that there are 10 questions that are actually administered to the candidate. And what's happening is a woman is being interviewed by a female interviewer, and what the candidate needs to do is discern whether that particular woman is lying or telling the truth. So it's an A or B, heads or tails, up or down kind of a situation, as opposed to, for example, rolling dice where you have 1 out of 6 chances, or a deck of cards, 1 out of 52 in a normal deck of cards, that kind of thing. Test number 2 is measuring a different set of skills in being able to discern truth or lies, and it's called the Opinion Deception Judgment Task. Well, how many questions are there for this? And it turns out, you can see right by this little marker, it says the Opinion Deception Judgment Task consists of 1-minute segments from each of 10 videotaped interviews. And these are interviews of different men, and it's the same thing. The person in the video is either lying or telling the truth, and the candidate has to state which it is. So again, it's a 50-50 probability. And number 3 is something called the Crime Deception Judgment Task, which again measures a completely, totally different set of skills in discerning truth or deception. And you can probably see this coming. 10, in this case, men, either lied or told the truth about whether they'd stolen $50. So what we know is each of the sections, which we can see have 10 questions each. Each of the 10 questions is 50-50 odds, just lying or telling the truth, as opposed to, like I said, a deck of cards or a roll of the dice and stuff like that. Knowing this, it's really easy to figure out the odds. So let's go do that. For openers, let's look at the 3 scenarios to pass. Scenario 1 is you get 90 to 100 on the first test, and let's just say you fail the second test. Let's say you get a 20 or a 30 or a 50 or a 70. But you pass the third test, you get an 80 or a 90 or a 100, that's passing. So that would make a person a truth wizard. Scenario number 2, again, you have to pass test 1 with a 90 or a 100. Let's say you pass test 2, you get an 80 or a 90 or a 100, but you don't do well on test 3. You just don't have that particular skill. You get a 0 or a 10 or a 20 or a 50 or a 60 or a 70 or whatever. That's still passing. Scenario number 3, which is pretty remote, and as you'll see in a couple seconds, hard to do, is passing all 3. So you get a 90 to 100 on test 1, 80 to 100 on test 2, and 80 to 100 on test 3. Figuring the odds on this, and I'll just give you the highlights here, it's pretty straightforward. On the emotion, deception, judgment task, the odds come out to be 0.01 as a decimal, or in English, it's slightly above 1%. And that's just for part 1. For test 2, the odds actually go up a little bit because now you can get 8 or 9 or 10. So the odds of passing just part 2 are about roughly 5.5%. And the odds in passing just part 3, and again that's part 3 alone if it was freestanding, turned out to be exactly the same. So again, the odds on passing part 1 are just a slight hair above 1%, part 2 just a slight hair below 5.5%, and same thing for part 3. So, raises the obvious question. What's the probability? Well, it turns out, when you put it all together, the probability of passing scenario 1 is 6 out of 10,000. Probability of passing part 2 is also 6 out of 10,000. Probability of passing part 3 is minuscule. It's really, really, really small. It's 3 out of 100,000. It's so small it doesn't really even dent the final result. So the final result, what are the odds in being able to pass this by guess or luck or, guessing birthdays or something like that? Turns out it's about 12 in 10,000. What does this mean in English? If you just give this test to 10,000 people and they all guess randomly, on average, about 12 of them are going to be able to do it. So, are there some other examples of this that we might be able to use that kind of give an idea of what 12 in 10,000 is? Well, a couple of different ways to do it. You can look at it as a percentage. It's 0.12%, or maybe a different way of looking at it, the probability of failing this thing is 99.88%. And man, I thought my calculus grades were bad. 99.88% of percentage of failing is really hard. There are a couple of real-world analogies that make this pretty easy to understand, or easier to understand, because this is something you'll be able to get your head around pretty fast. What are the odds of making the pros in sports? And I want to stress, this is not the Wizard's test. This is becoming a pro athlete. And if we look specifically at American football, which some parts of the world call gridiron, we see that in the United States, a high school senior player goes on to play NCAA men's football. It's about 1 in 17, which is about 5.8%. And NCAA senior players who are drafted by an NFL team, about 1 in 50, so that's about 2%. So if we put it all together, what we get are high school senior players who are eventually drafted. And I want to stress the word drafted. This does not mean they get 1 second of playing time. You may never see them on the field. But those senior players who are eventually drafted by an NFL team, about 9 out of 10,000. 9 out of 10,000. And if we look at the results in our Truth Wizards test, we see that it's approximately 12 out of 10,000. So they're pretty darn close. So the odds of passing the Truth Wizards test are very roughly the same as a high school senior eventually being drafted by an NFL team. There's a different measure that I think might be just as useful, and as a musician I appreciate this. What's the admissions rate to Juilliard? The Juilliard School's admission rate is 6%, according to Google. If you do a search, at least that's what I got. And so if we compare passing the Wizard's test to the Juilliard admission rate, the Juilliard admission rate is 6%. The Wizard's test is 0.12%. So if you simply take 6% and divide it by 0.12%, the Wizard's test is 50 times more difficult than getting admitted to Juilliard. Maybe that will give you an idea of how hard this thing is to pass. And again, this is just by random chance. The last couple points, Dr. Ekman and Dr. O'Sullivan said they tested approximately 15,000. I think I even read one time 20,000, but I can't vouch for that. And they found 50. Well, mathematically, that's really strange. They should have found about 18. So if you're looking for about 18, you find 50. Why did you find so many more than expected? Well, it turns out Dr. O'Sullivan gives us the answer in this presentation. And again, you can go back and listen to it. What she says is that there are several groups that test very highly for the Truth Wizard skill. For example, federal judges, the ones she tested, not all federal judges by any means, people who teach interviewing to police officers, members of the Secret Service, these all tested very highly. By way of contrast, for example, psychologists did no better than chance, nor did regular police officers. So the reason they got so many more than is expected is because they happened to inadvertently come across subgroups of the general population that do really well at this particular skill, as well as just people in general. There are other people who just walking around who happen to be good at this. By way of analogy, if you were doing a test for the skill, musical skill called perfect pitch, and you walked around just up and down like Michigan Avenue in Chicago and see how many people have it, not that many people are going to have it. But if you go to my alma mater, the Western Michigan University School of Music, you're going to find a ton of people who have it. And that's kind of what happened with the Wizard's test. They just happened to find subgroups of people who had it. That's how they wound up with so many more than would statistically be expected. The other point that's been raised in the literature, with which I strongly agree, is that this is one test, and it would need additional validation. And I think that's extremely true. And everyone who's gone public, such as Eyes for Lies and J.J. Newberry, as well as a few others, have shown in enormous abundance that they actually genuinely, truly do have this skill. And so that adds an enormous amount of validity to this. So while the odds in passing it one time might be 12 in 10,000, as a person demonstrates this more and more and more and more and more, the confidence in that particular skill just becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. So hopefully this answers the question. Again, the odds in passing it are about, just in random chance, about 12 in 10,000. The odds in failing it are about 99.88%, which by contrast, my calculus tests now look easy compared to that. And that this is a very valid skill, especially when independent evidence is considered. So if this kind of thing is interesting to you and you think more research would be valuable, jump in. There are lots of opportunities. There would be enormous benefits to society and security in lots of areas for people who can generate more research and determine how these presently 50 people actually do this, and the benefits, again, to the security for the country would be just enormous. So if that's of interest to you, again, I would suggest very strongly that you pursue that. Thank you very much, and have a safe day. Bye now.